A boy vanishes in 1991 at his birthday party. 10 years later, his dad finds something at a yard sale that changes everything. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who never give up hope will do it before this story begins. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the Reynolds family's spacious backyard, where the sounds of laughter and playful shouts filled the crisp autumn air. Balloons bobbed gently in the soft breeze, their bright colors clashing with the rich amber and crimson leaves scattered on the freshly mown grass. 12-year-old Ethan Reynolds darted between clusters of children, his face alight with joy as he chased a soccer ball near the towering oak tree that marked the edge of the yard. The scent of grilled meat mingled with the earthy smell of damp leaves, carrying from the back porch where Thomas Reynolds stood at the charcoal grill, carefully turning burgers with steady hands. Thomas's eyes never left the crowd of children. Despite the warmth of the gathering and the comforting routine of cooking for family and friends, a tightening knot settled deep in his chest. "Ethan, don't run too far," he called out, his voice firm yet calm, hoping to keep his son within reach. Ethan turned briefly, flashing a mischievous grin before sprinting toward the garden gate that led to the neighbor's yard. Thomas's gaze followed, his brow furrowing. The moment was brief, too brief, but when Thomas looked away to check the burgers, the boy was gone. Panic prickled Thomas's skin. He dropped the spatula onto the grill, the sizzle of the meat now drowned by the sudden stillness around him. "Ethan?" His voice cracked slightly, shaking as he stepped away from the porch. The kids' laughter faltered, their games halting as a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward the father's urgent call. Mothers gathered nearby, faces tightening with concern, whispering amongst themselves. "Has anyone seen Ethan?" Thomas's voice grew louder, cutting through the uneasy quiet like a knife. The backyard, once full of light-hearted noise, now felt charged with tension. His heart pounded in his ears as he scanned the familiar faces. "He was right here a minute ago," Thomas said, desperation creeping into his tone. A neighbor, Mr. Sanders, approached with a frown, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I didn't see him go past my fence," he said carefully. "Have you checked the street?" "No," Thomas replied, his legs already moving. "Not yet." He rushed toward the garden gate, the crunch of leaves beneath his feet sharp against the muffled silence that had settled like a fog. His mind raced through every possible place Ethan could have wandered to. The woods beyond the fence, the abandoned lot next door, even the narrow alley behind the houses. His throat tightened with fear. "Ethan!" he shouted again, voice raw with growing dread. The sky darkened slightly, clouds rolling in as if nature itself sensed the change in mood. Thomas's calls grew frantic as he rounded the block, joining a small group of neighbors who had come out to help. The children huddled together, whispering and glancing nervously at the trees that lined the street. "We'll find him," Thomas assured them, though the hollow ache in his chest contradicted his words. He forced himself to stay calm, to think clearly, but each step felt heavier, the weight of uncertainty crushing down on him. Hours passed, and the daylight waned, replaced by the flickering glow of porch lights and flashlights bobbing through the darkness. The neighborhood transformed into a maze of searching faces and anxious voices. Thomas's hands trembled as he spoke to the police officers who had arrived, explaining everything he knew, replaying the moments leading up to Ethan's disappearance again and again. "He was right there," Thomas insisted, voice breaking. "I turned away for just a second." The officers exchanged glances, their faces grim but professional. "We'll do everything we can," one promised, but Thomas could hear the hesitation beneath the words, the unspoken truth that no clues had yet appeared. Back at the Reynolds house, the living room was bathed in a cold blue light from the television, broadcasting news reports about the search. Thomas sat on the edge of the worn couch, head in his hands, replaying every moment, every choice. Guilt gnawed at him like a relentless storm. If only I hadn't looked away. If only I'd held his hand tighter. His wife's absence left a hollow silence in the room, but Thomas clung to the hope that his son was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. He reached for the small soccer ball Ethan had left behind near the porch, fingers trembling as he traced the faded scuffs. The party that had begun with joy and celebration had dissolved into a nightmare, each passing hour deepening the shadow that swallowed the Reynolds family. Neighbors lingered nearby, offering quiet support, but eyes darted toward the dark woods beyond the backyard, where shadows seemed to swallow all light and hope. Thomas stood at the window, staring out into the gathering night, whispering his vow beneath his breath. "I will find my son, no matter how long it takes." Thomas's fingers trembled as he lifted the weathered wooden box from the cluttered stall, its dust coating his skin like a forgotten secret begging to be uncovered. The muffled sounds of the flea market, voices haggling, the distant clang of metal, the rustle of worn fabric, faded into the background as his eyes locked onto the faded photograph tucked inside. A young boy smiled, holding a birthday cake with flickering candles, and something deep inside Thomas clenched tightly. The face was unmistakable. Ethan. His heart pounded fiercely, echoing in his ears like a warning and a call all at once. He pulled the photo out carefully, tracing the boy's features with a shaking thumb. The vibrant innocence frozen in time tore through the years of silence and despair. Around the photo, a torn piece of paper lay crumpled, bearing a cryptic message scrawled in faded ink. "The past hides more than memories." Thomas swallowed hard, a dry lump forming in his throat. How had this box, this fragment of his shattered past, ended up here in this dusty flea market, so far from the quiet streets of Maplewood? His mind raced with questions: who left it, and why? Was it a cruel prank or a beacon of hope? He glanced nervously around the busy market, the chatter suddenly feeling intrusive, as if the crowd might snatch the fragile thread of truth slipping through his fingers. He folded the photo carefully and pressed the note to his chest. His breath came quick, mingling with the scent of old wood and faded memories. "This changes everything," he whispered, voice barely audible, laced with a trembling mix of disbelief and cautious hope. A sharp tug at his sleeve startled him. "Sir, are you all right?" a young vendor asked, eyes wide with concern. Thomas blinked, forcing a weak smile. "Yes, thank you. Just remembering." He straightened, trying to shake the weight of years from his shoulders. As he moved away from the stall, the box cradled in his arms, the world around him seemed simultaneously heavier and lighter, heavier with the burden of unknown truths, lighter with the fragile glow of a chance to reclaim what was lost. His mind replayed the last moments he saw Ethan at that birthday party, the laughter, the games, and then the crushing absence. For years, he had buried that pain deep, telling himself the boy was gone forever. But now, this small discovery cracked open a door he thought sealed shut. Thomas's steps grew purposeful as he left the crowded market behind, the photograph and note like a secret pact pressing against his heart. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. Questions would stir suspicion, and answers might bring more pain. Yet, the flicker of hope kindled a fire inside him he had long forgotten. In the quiet of his modest home later that evening, Thomas placed the photograph on the kitchen table under the flickering light, staring at it as if it held the power to rewrite the past. His hands clenched into fists. The longing for his son surged anew, mingled with the cold fear of what truths might surface. He whispered again, this time with steadier resolve, "This changes everything." Thomas slammed the front door behind him, the worn wooden frame groaning softly in protest. His hands trembled as he unfolded the brittle photograph and the crumpled note. The image, faded but unmistakable, showed a boy holding a birthday cake, his bright eyes gleaming with innocence and joy. That boy was Ethan. The note, with its jagged edges and hurried scrawl, read, "The past hides more than memories." A chill crept up Thomas's spine as he pressed the paper to his chest, a swirl of hope and dread knotting in his stomach. Without hesitation, Thomas found his brother David seated at the kitchen table, fingers tapping restlessly on a chipped mug. The room smelled faintly of old wood and morning coffee, but the warmth was absent between the two men. David's face hardened the moment he saw the photo. His eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, voice edged with suspicion. Thomas held the photo steady, meeting David's gaze. I found it today at the flea market. There was a box, dusty, forgotten, and inside was this, along with a note. David's jaw tightened. And you didn't tell me about the note? I didn't want to worry you. I needed to be sure first. Thomas's voice was quiet but resolute. This could mean Ethan was alive after all. David slammed his palm on the table, making the mug jump. You're chasing ghosts, Thomas. You need to accept it. Ethan's gone. You've lived in denial for too long. His tone was sharp, but beneath it lay a tremor of something deeper, fear, maybe guilt. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. And what if I'm not wrong? What if there's still something here, something we missed? David's eyes flickered, a dark storm beneath his calm surface. For a fleeting second, Thomas caught the flash of anger, maybe even resentment. It vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of indifference. Thomas swallowed hard, the unspoken tension thickening the air. He pushed the feeling aside. There were more pressing things to worry about. He folded the photo carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. I'm going to call Marcus. He helped me before. Maybe he can find out who left this box. David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Thomas with wary eyes. Just don't drag me into another wild goose chase. Thomas ignored the warning and stepped outside, the crisp air filling his lungs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the cracked pavement, but his mind was elsewhere, racing. Each step toward his old truck echoed memories of a happier time, of laughter, of a boy who should have been there. At the payphone down the street, Thomas dialed Marcus's number. The voice on the other end was warm and steady, a familiar anchor. Marcus, it's Thomas. I need your help. Something's come up, something I can't ignore. After hanging up, Thomas began retracing Ethan's last known steps. He visited the small park where Ethan had played, running his fingers along the cold metal of the swings. He stopped by Mrs. Caldwell's house, the elderly neighbor who had always watched over the neighborhood kids. But when he knocked, the door remained shut. Voices drifted inside, whispers too hushed to catch, but heavy with warning. Thomas's visits to old friends and neighbors yielded the same result. Guarded eyes, clipped answers, and doors that closed just a little too quickly. At the local diner, a few patrons stared at him as he asked quiet questions, their expressions folding into polite avoidance. His heart ached with each rejection. The town didn't want to dredge up the past. Their silence screamed louder than any confession. But Thomas's resolve only deepened. The photograph, the note, they were cracks in the wall of silence. He could feel it now like a heartbeat beneath the surface. As dusk settled and the streetlights flickered on, Thomas stood alone by the empty swing set. The cool evening breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the weight of years lost and the fragile hope of a truth waiting to be uncovered. Still, Thomas knew, the truth is closer than anyone thinks. The dusty edges of the wooden box still clung to the scent of old pine and forgotten secrets as Marcus turned it over carefully in his hands. This came from Carl Myers, he said quietly, eyes narrowing. I checked the registry. Reclusive. Lives just outside town. Hasn't been seen in months. His voice held a mix of curiosity and caution. Thomas's chest tightened. Carl Myers, the name rang with quiet mystery. The kind of man who collected lost things and kept to the shadows. A man who might hold pieces of Ethan's story locked away like the objects he hoarded. They didn't waste a moment. The sun was sinking behind Maplewood's tree-lined horizon, casting long fingers of dusk across the fields as they drove in silence toward Carl's cabin. The road narrowed and twisted, flanked by dense thickets that seemed to lean closer with every mile. Thomas's mind churned, a whirlpool of hope and dread. What would they find? His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The cabin came into view, a crumbling silhouette swallowed by weeds and neglect. Its weathered boards sagged under years of rain and wind, windows clouded with grime. Thomas's breath hitched when Marcus slowed the car. Look, Marcus said, pointing at the ground near the porch. Footprints, too large to be Carl's, etched deep in the mud, some scuffed, others abruptly ending at the door. Thomas pushed open the creaking screen door. The stale air inside was thick with dust and something more unsettling, an acrid metallic tang that twisted his stomach. Floorboards creaked underfoot as they stepped inside, eyes scanning the dim room. It was empty, the sparse furniture overturned, broken glass scattered like shards of forgotten memories. Then Marcus spotted it, a crumpled piece of paper lying near the fireplace. He picked it up with a gloved hand, smoothing it against his palm. Thomas's heart slammed when he saw the words, hastily scrawled. An address. An abandoned warehouse. On the edge of town, Marcus said, voice low, grave. Thomas's pulse thundered in his ears. This was more than a clue. It was a calling. A break after all these years. But Marcus's gaze hardened. If someone's been hiding something this long, they don't want it uncovered. We need to be careful. Thomas swallowed hard, the cold creeping into his bones not from the chill in the cabin but from the weight of what lay ahead. Yet beneath the fear, a fierce ember of anger flared, anger at the silence, the lies, the years stolen. I have to go there, he said, voice steady but fierce, eyes locking with Marcus's. No more waiting. They packed quickly, the gravity of the night settling around them like a shroud. As darkness deepened, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Thomas felt the familiar knot tighten in his gut, uncertainty wrapped with resolve. Driving through quiet streets toward the warehouse, the air grew heavier, shadows lengthening, every rustle a whisper of secrets wanting to stay buried. When they reached the outskirts, the warehouse loomed, a hulking relic of forgotten industry. Its cracked concrete walls bore scars of time, faded graffiti, shattered windows like vacant eyes staring into the abyss. A distant howl of wind threaded through the broken panes, carrying a hollow warning. Thomas stepped out of the car, every sense alert. His hands trembled, not from cold, but anticipation. This ends now. The sun had nearly slipped away, leaving behind a bruised purple sky as Thomas and Marcus stood before the warehouse's battered entrance. The building loomed like a forgotten giant, its cracked concrete walls scarred with layers of peeling paint and chaotic graffiti. Broken glass crunched faintly under their boots as they stepped carefully over scattered debris, the cool evening air biting at their exposed skin. Inside, the cavernous space swallowed their footsteps, the echoes bouncing off cold metal beams and rusted machinery long since abandoned. A heavy stillness pressed down, broken only by the distant hum of city life fading behind them. Marcus's sharp eyes caught fresh footprints pressed deep into the thin layer of dust blanketing the floor. They traced a path toward a locked metal door, its surface scarred but solid. Thomas swallowed hard, heart pounding in his chest. He felt a tremor in his hands, a mixture of hope and dread warring beneath his skin. Marcus silently passed him a slim lock-picking tool, his gaze steady and unwavering. Thomas knelt, fingers fumbling initially but growing surer with each careful movement. The faint click of the lock releasing echoed loud in the quiet space, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit, cramped room beyond. The stale scent of dust and damp would hit Thomas like a wave. The room was sparse, scattered old toys, a ragged blanket stained with time, and, resting atop a small wooden crate, a notebook. With hands trembling but deliberate, Thomas reached out and flipped open the notebook. The pages were yellowed and frayed, filled with small, uneven handwriting, the tentative scrawl of a child. The words inside whispered stories of fear, hiding, and loneliness. His eyes scanned rapidly. Ethan, don't let them find me. I'm scared. Each phrase struck Thomas like a physical blow, confirming what his heart had dared to hope, that his son had been here, alive after all those years. A sudden noise shattered the fragile moment, a faint shuffle of footsteps outside the door. Thomas froze, breath hitching in his throat. Marcus's eyes sharpened, and he raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence. Reaching slowly for his phone, Marcus's fingers paused as Thomas shook his head, the steel pipe he'd grabbed from nearby resting heavy and reassuring in his grip. We're not leaving without answers, Thomas whispered fiercely, the edge in his voice unyielding. The door swung open slowly, casting a long shadow across the floor as a tall man stepped inside. His eyes, cold and unreadable, locked onto Thomas with unsettling calm. He moved with a deliberate, controlled grace, body tense but composed. "You don't know what you're digging into," the man said quietly, voice low and warning. The air in the cramped room thickened with unease the moment the tall man's gaze locked onto Thomas. Alan Pierce's eyes, cold and sharp as fractured glass, seemed to cut through the dimness like a blade. His voice was low, carrying a bitterness that tasted like old regrets and shattered hopes. "You've stirred something best left buried," Alan said, stepping closer, the floor creaking beneath his worn boots. Thomas's chest tightened, every muscle tensed with a mixture of fear and anger. The years of searching, the endless nights of wondering where Ethan could be, it all boiled into a fierce determination that clenched his jaw. "I'm not leaving without answers," Thomas said steadily, forcing his voice to stay calm even as his hands trembled at his sides. Alan's eyes flickered with a shadow of pain. "I was the lead detective on your son's case," he confessed quietly, "until I got too close. They didn't want the truth getting out. Powerful people with deep roots in this town made sure I was pushed aside and silenced." Thomas's heart pounded harder, disbelief swirling with hope. What truth? What did Ethan see that night? A bitter laugh escaped Alan's lips. Something no child should have witnessed. Something tied to the town's elite, men who believed themselves untouchable. "Your son became a threat, so they hid him. Not to hurt him, but to protect him. Or maybe to protect themselves." The weight of Alan's words slammed into Thomas like a thunderclap. His mind raced through every detail, every memory from that day. Fear gripped him, cold and relentless, but it was quickly replaced by a rising flame of anger. "Where is he?" Thomas demanded. "You say he's alive. Then tell me where." Alan hesitated, his face darkening. "I wish I knew. No one does. But you must stop this search, Thomas. Some truths, they destroy more than just memories. They ruin lives." Thomas's eyes narrowed, refusing to bow to the warning. "My son's life is worth any risk." A tense silence stretched between them. Marcus, standing a few steps behind Thomas, shifted uneasily, his gaze flickering to Alan's hand. A sudden twitch beneath the coat caught his attention, a subtle movement toward something hidden. Marcus's heart leapt. "A gun." "Wait," Marcus started. But before the words left his mouth, the lights flickered violently, sputtering like a dying heartbeat before plunging the room into darkness. The cold void swallowed every sound except the rapid pounding of Thomas's heart. He felt breath on his neck, cold, deliberate, and then the unmistakable pressure of metal pressing against his side. Alan's voice, now a whisper thick with menace, curled into Thomas's ear. "You should have stayed away." Darkness swallowed the cramped room, pressing against Thomas's skin like a suffocating blanket. His breath came shallow, heart pounding so loudly it threatened to drown out every other sound. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on his shoulders as he struggled to steady his trembling hands. He could barely see the outline of Alan Pierce, the bitter ex-detective whose presence had thrown this fragile search into chaos. Suddenly, a shattering crash sliced through the silence, glass exploding from a window somewhere behind them. The sharp crack of breaking glass was like a flare in the dark, and Marcus reacted instantly. He lunged toward the noise, muscles coiled with urgency, forcing Thomas to seize the fleeting moment. With raw determination, Thomas grappled with Alan, fingers clawing at the man's jacket as Alan fought back fiercely, desperation flashing in his eyes. The metal barrel of the hidden gun pressed cold and unforgiving against Thomas's side just moments before the struggle erupted. Boxes toppled, papers scattered in a frantic storm around them. The scent of dust and old wood filled the air, mixing with the sharp tang of adrenaline and fear. Thomas's mind raced, caught between panic and instinct, muscles tightening as he wrestled to wrest the weapon free. Their breaths came ragged and fast, breaths clouding in the cold air of the abandoned warehouse. Alan twisted violently, breaking free from Thomas's grip with a vicious shove. His eyes burned with fury as he darted toward the back exit, a shadow slipping into the gloom. Thomas barely had time to register the slam of the door closing behind him before he and Marcus collapsed onto the floor, chests heaving, sweat slick against their skin. Marcus's hands trembled as he fumbled to unlock his phone, the small screen casting a pale light onto their sweat-streaked faces. Together, they began to gather the strewn papers, scraps of truth scattered like leaves in a storm. Thomas's fingers brushed over a folded map, rough and worn, the edges curling from age. He unfolded it carefully, eyes scanning the hastily drawn marks. A warehouse, a dense forest clearing, and a solitary house on Willow Lane. His heart clenched as recognition flooded through him. Willow Lane, the very street where Ethan's birthday party had taken place all those years ago. The map was a silent testament, proof that the past was far from buried. The mystery was alive, pulsing with danger and unanswered questions. Thomas's jaw tightened. The weight of the truth pressed harder than ever. Marcus's voice was low but urgent. Thomas, this isn't just old history coming back. These people, they're still out there, watching, waiting. We have to be careful. They won't hesitate to stop us. Thomas swallowed hard, feeling the cold fire of resolve flare inside him. Every step forward was a risk, every question a possible trap. But the thought of turning back was impossible. His son was out there somewhere, and he would not rest until he brought him home. His eyes burned with fierce determination, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I'm closer than ever," Thomas said, the words carrying a promise forged in years of pain and hope. "I won't stop until I bring Ethan home." The night air was thick with tension as Thomas and Marcus crept through the shadows, their breaths shallow and steady. The towering silhouette of the Willow Lane estate loomed before them, its high stone walls crowned with wrought iron spikes that gleamed faintly beneath the moonlight. Surveillance cameras perched like silent sentinels on every corner, their lenses sweeping the grounds with mechanical precision. Thomas's pulse hammered in his ears, every instinct screaming caution, but his resolve was ironclad. This was the next step, the thread they had to pull. Marcus glanced at the overgrown garden wall, dense with thorny bushes and tangled ivy, and nodded. "This is our way in," he whispered, voice low and calm despite the stakes. Carefully, they edged forward, hands brushing aside thorny branches that snagged at their clothes. The crunch of dry leaves beneath their boots seemed deafening in the heavy silence. Thomas's heart thudded, not just from fear, but from the weight of what they might uncover. Slipping through a broken section of the garden fence, they found themselves at a narrow, winding path leading to the back of the mansion. The grand house, dark and forbidding, seemed to watch them with cold indifference. Marcus produced a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness as they approached a basement window obscured by shutters. With practiced ease, Marcus popped the latch, and they slipped inside, the faint scent of dust and old paper greeting them like a long-forgotten secret. Inside, the house was eerily still. Their footsteps echoed softly over creaky wooden floors as they made their way toward a study filled with shelves sagging under the weight of old books and files. The air smelled faintly of mildew and aged leather. Thomas's eyes caught the worn spines of folders stamped with dates from years past, photographs faded but still haunting, and scattered letters pinned to a corkboard. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up a yellowed envelope addressed to Gregory Shaw. The handwriting was neat but hurried, the message inside a chilling warning: "Keep quiet, for your own good." The room's oppressive silence was shattered suddenly by muffled voices drifting down from above. Thomas's breath caught, and he motioned for Marcus to hide behind a heavy curtain beside the window. They crouched low, the fabric cool against their skin as they strained to listen. Gregory's voice, smooth but laced with urgency, floated down the stairs. "The boy must remain hidden forever," he said into the phone, the menace in his tone unmistakable. "No one can find him. No one." Thomas's chest tightened. This was no longer just a missing child's case. It was a dark conspiracy woven deep into the town's elite. He whispered, "This is bigger than I thought." Marcus nodded grimly, raising his phone to snap pictures of the letters and documents scattered across the desk. capturing evidence that could shatter the silence that had protected this secret for years. The cold weight of the truth pressed down on them, but there was no time to hesitate. Suddenly, the sharp slam of the front door echoed through the mansion, breaking the fragile calm. Thomas and Marcus froze as heavy footsteps stormed through the hallway. From the shadows emerged a group of stern-faced men in dark suits, Gregory's security team, their eyes sharp and unforgiving. One stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. "You're trespassing," the guard snarled, his gaze locking onto Thomas. "This isn't over. If that moment pulled at your heart, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because sometimes the smallest clues bring the biggest truths." Thomas and Marcus dashed through the dense, shadowy garden, every step crunching sharply on the gravel beneath their feet. The shrill wail of alarms tore through the night air, mingling with the harsh, sweeping beams of spotlights that clawed at the darkness like angry fingers. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest, each breath ragged and shallow as he pushed his legs harder, sweat stinging his eyes. Behind them, the shriek of a security guard's voice cut through the chaos, barking orders. But the two men moved faster than the startled response could catch up. The garden was a maze of thick bushes, towering hedges, and tangled vines, all slick with recent rain that made the scent of wet earth and crushed leaves rise in the cool night air. Thomas ducked low beneath a hanging branch, the rough bark scraping his scalp, and felt Marcus's hand grab his arm, pulling him into the shadow of a wide oak tree. They crouched, chests heaving, barely daring to whisper. Clutched tightly in Marcus's gloved hand were the photos they had risked everything to take, grainy images of dusty files, aged letters, and a chilling note that bore the signature of Gregory Shaw himself. Thomas's mind spun as the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Why had Gregory gone to such lengths to protect these secrets? What terrible truths were hidden behind those guarded walls? His jaw clenched as fragments of the night's discoveries replayed in his head. The veiled threats, the suspicious phone calls, the chilling mention of the boy, and keeping him hidden forever. The weight of those words pressed down on him heavier than any physical burden. Marcus's eyes met Thomas's, dark and serious beneath the brim of his hat. "We're not just poking around in old family business," Marcus whispered, voice tense. "This is something bigger. A network of power and silence that's kept Maplewood's darkest truths buried for decades." Thomas nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't since Ethan vanished. Every step forward was a step deeper into a web woven by men who wielded influence like weapons, men who wouldn't hesitate to crush anyone who threatened their secrets. The two men slipped away from the estate, navigating the quiet back streets until they reached the dim glow of a street lamp outside a small, weathered church. Thomas's fingers trembled as he pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number, the only man he trusted beyond family and friend. The line crackled, then a warm, steady voice answered. "Thomas? It's late. What's happened?" Father Samuel's voice was calm, the kind of voice that carried the weight of years spent counseling souls in turmoil. Thomas could almost see his friend's gentle eyes behind his round spectacles, the soft lines of worry etched deeply into his face. "I need your counsel, Samuel," Thomas said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "There's more to Ethan's disappearance than I ever imagined. Powerful men, dangerous men. They've been hiding secrets, protecting legacies. I fear the shadows that hang over Maplewood run deeper than any of us thought." Samuel was silent for a moment, then sighed, heavy with the burden of knowledge. "Maplewood's roots run deep, Thomas. There are families here whose histories are intertwined with the town's very foundation. Families who will guard their secrets with everything they have. I've heard whispers of a group. They call themselves the Guardians. They watch over those secrets, keep the peace, but at what cost?" Thomas's stomach tightened, a cold knot of fear twisting inside him. The thought that such a group existed, men who believed they were above the law, above justice, made the danger palpable. It wasn't just about finding Ethan anymore. It was about confronting a system built on silence and fear. "Who can I trust?" Thomas asked, voice barely above a whisper. Samuel's reply was steady. but somber. Trust is a fragile thing, especially now. But you have allies, Thomas. Be cautious with whom you share your path. The shadows watch, and they will act if they sense a threat. As Thomas ended the call, Marcus placed a steady hand on his shoulder. If they're watching, we have to be smarter, Marcus said quietly, his eyes scanning the dark streets as if expecting unseen eyes to be upon them. Because they won't stop until this stays buried. The harvest festival buzzed with life, its colorful lights casting a warm glow over the town square. The sweet scent of caramel apples and freshly baked pies mingled with the crisp autumn air, while laughter and chatter rose above the steady hum of a folk band playing near the gazebo. Thomas Reynolds stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes scanning the sea of faces with a mix of hope and wariness. Around him, the familiar sights of Maplewood felt both comforting and suffocating. The same streets, the same smiling neighbors, yet beneath the surface, secrets lurked. Beside him, Marcus tightened his grip on his coat collar, his gaze sharp and alert. "There," Marcus whispered, nodding toward a cluster of men gathered near the old oak tree. Thomas's heart tightened when he saw Gregory Shaw, the wealthy businessman whose name was whispered in hushed tones around town. Shaw's tall frame was cloaked in a dark overcoat, his posture rigid, the expression on his face unreadable but cold. Thomas's eyes followed as Shaw slipped away from the group and approached a tall, broad-shouldered man leaning against a lamppost. Sheriff Lane. The sheriff's face was carved from stone, his eyes shadowed beneath a heavy brow. He radiated authority, not the kind earned through respect, but the kind that commanded silence through fear. Thomas's throat tightened. The man had always been known for ruthless enforcement, a man who silenced rumors with a look and crushed dissent without hesitation. The sight of Shaw and Lane together sent a chill down Thomas's spine. "Looks like the town skeletons come out for the festival too," Marcus muttered under his breath, tightening his fist. "We need to hear what they're saying." Thomas nodded, his pulse quickening. Every step he took toward the two men was heavy with dread and determination. The festive music seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the pounding of his own heart. He knew this moment was a gamble. One wrong move could shatter whatever fragile ground he stood on. But the weight of years without answers pressed him forward. As Thomas drew closer, he caught fragments of the conversation, low and urgent, but thick with menace. "We can't afford any loose ends," Shaw said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "If that boy's name leaks, everything falls apart." Sheriff Lane's gaze flickered briefly to the crowd, narrowing. "I've handled the rest. No one's talking. Not on my watch." Thomas's breath caught. The boy. They were still talking about Ethan, his son. The implications hit harder than any blow. It wasn't just a missing child anymore. It was a secret worth protecting with every means possible. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He swallowed the surge of anger and fear and tried to steady his voice. "Gregory," Thomas said, stepping into the dim light, "I'm done hiding in the shadows." Both men turned sharply, surprise flashing across Shaw's face, quickly masked by a cold smile. Sheriff Lane's eyes darkened, unreadable. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" Lane asked, voice low and dangerous. "I'm looking for answers," Thomas said firmly. "Answers about my son." Gregory Shaw took a step forward, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Some truths are better left buried, Reynolds." The weight of those words pressed down on Thomas, but he refused to back down. His gaze locked onto Lane's. "Are you hiding him? Or is there something worse I need to know?" Thomas demanded, voice steady despite the fire burning in his chest. Sheriff Lane's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. The tension between them was like a coiled spring ready to snap. Marcus moved closer, eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of intervention. "We're not leaving until we get the truth," he said quietly. Shaw's expression flickered, perhaps irritation or fear. He glanced around nervously, then stepped back. "You're meddling in things beyond your understanding," Shaw said sharply. "Walk away, Thomas, before it's too late." But Thomas's resolve hardened. Every moment without answers was a moment lost. His son was out there somewhere, and no threat or warning could make him stop. The festive lights twinkled above, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like fingers trying to pull him back into the dark. But Thomas stood firm, the chill of the night matched only by the fire inside him. As Thomas approached, a chilling thought struck him. Are they hiding Ethan? Or did something worse happen? The fading light of the Harvest Festival cast long shadows across the bustling fairgrounds. But Thomas Reynolds moved with purpose, slipping quietly through the crowds. His eyes never left Gregory Shaw, the wealthy man whose calm demeanor barely concealed the storm beneath. Beside Gregory, Sheriff Lane stalked like a silent predator, his sharp gaze scanning the area with unsettling alertness. Thomas's pulse quickened as he kept his distance, weaving through the clusters of festival-goers while inching closer to the secluded pavilion at the far edge of the grounds. The air was thick with the scent of roasted corn and fading autumn leaves, but beneath the cheerful hum of laughter and music, Thomas heard something darker, whispers laced with menace. He crouched behind a wooden crate, the rough edges digging into his palms as he strained to catch their words. Gregory's voice was low and tense, each syllable weighed with caution. Loose ends can't be allowed to unravel this any further, he said sharply. We keep the boy quiet. No mistakes. Sheriff Lane's voice was rough, edged with impatience. People are talking, and there are questions we can't afford. If this gets out. His words trailed off, but the threat hung in the chilly air like a blade. Thomas's heart pounded so loudly, he feared it might give him away. His mind raced. This was no ordinary conversation about a missing child. It was a calculated plan, spoken in hushed tones, a secret guarded fiercely by those who wielded power in Maplewood. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Ethan's disappearance was not a tragedy lost to time. It was a dangerous secret buried beneath layers of deception. Suddenly, a rough hand clamped over Thomas's mouth, silencing him before he could even react. Panic surged as he spun around to see his brother, David, pressing against him, eyes wide and frantic. The familiar face felt like a cruel twist, betrayal sharper than any stranger's threat. You don't know what you're doing, David hissed urgently, his breath hot against Thomas's cheek. This goes deeper than you think. Back off before it destroys us all. Thomas struggled to steady his breathing, shock rooting him momentarily in place. His brother's words cut through the noise of the festival like a warning siren, but also a warning shrouded in fear. David's gaze darted nervously around, as if expecting unseen eyes to watch their every move. How long have you been involved? Thomas demanded, voice barely above a whisper, but trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Why would you protect them? Why betray your own blood? David's jaw clenched, eyes flickering with a pain Thomas couldn't understand. I'm trying to protect you. Protect the family. This isn't just about Ethan anymore. It's bigger than any of us can fight. Thomas's mind reeled, memories flashing. His brother's distant behavior, the strange warnings, the coldness that had grown over the years. If you're protecting them, you're protecting a lie, Thomas breathed, each word laced with the weight of betrayal. A lie that's killing us. David's silence was a wound deeper than any spoken confession. He looked away, unable to meet Thomas's eyes. The rift between them yawned wider, an unbridgeable chasm carved by secrets and fear. Behind them, the festival lights flickered uncertainly, as if the night itself sensed the tension that had settled like a shadow over the brothers. The cheerful music seemed distant now, a fragile mask over a town unraveling at the seams. Thomas's chest tightened with a mix of sorrow and resolve. The line between friend and foe blurred beyond recognition, and in that murky twilight, he realized the true battle was just beginning. The festival lights flickered and the night grew colder. The cold weight of betrayal pressed down on Thomas as he sat alone in the dim light of his study, replaying the chilling words from his brother's warning over and over in his mind. David's face haunted him, eyes wide with fear, a desperate urgency that clashed with the brother Thomas had once known. The gravity of the situation settled in his chest like a stone. Someone close was protecting a secret that threatened to tear their family apart. Yet, despite the danger, Thomas felt a fire ignite within him, a stubborn refusal to back down. Marcus's voice broke through the silence, steady but cautious. Thomas, maybe we should go to the police, or get the media involved. Let the light shine on this. Thomas shook his head, the lines of worry deepening on his face.
No, Marcus.
The corruption runs too deep. The moment we try to expose this openly, the whole thing will be buried. And they'll come after us even harder. He rubbed his tired eyes, then looked at the small device Marcus had slipped him earlier, a compact recorder no larger than a matchbox. This is how we get proof. Solid proof they can't deny. Night after night, Thomas crept into the darkened corners of the town hall, the once familiar building now transformed into a den of shadows and whispered schemes. His heartbeat echoed in his ears as he carefully placed the device beneath a heavy oak table, the epicenter of the secret meetings of the Guardians. The musty scent of old wood and faded carpet surrounded him as he withdrew silently, his breath shallow, every creak of the floor threatening to betray him. Back home, Thomas would sit by the flickering light of a single lamp, headphones snug over his ears, straining to catch every word. The voices on the recordings were low and cautious, but their menace was unmistakable. Loose ends must be tied. One man growled, his tone cold and final. No one gets out. Not the boy. Not the family. Thomas's fists clenched. The boy, his son, had been taken far from sight, kept in a place no one dared speak of openly. Worse still, the men controlling that secret were linked to someone he once trusted deeply. The bitter sting of betrayal cut through him like ice. Who could it be? Who had hidden Ethan away in the name of protection, but at what cost? Another voice, smoother but equally chilling, whispered plans to silence Thomas himself. We'll make sure he disappears before he uncovers too much. No mercy. The threat settled over Thomas like a storm cloud, but with it came clarity. This was no ordinary fight. It was a battle against powerful men who controlled the town's fate, and his family's. The knowledge weighed heavily, but Thomas's resolve hardened. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He pictured Ethan's face, now a young man, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for his father's rescue. That image fueled his determination. I will bring my son home, no matter the cost. Rain hammered down in relentless sheets, drumming on the tin roof of the small cabin where Thomas sat frozen, clutching the phone tightly. The voice on the other end was grainy, a distant whisper carried by static, but the words were clear enough to shatter the fragile hope that had sustained him. We're moving the boy. Tonight, new location. Secure. No loose ends. Thomas's breath hitched, his chest tightening with a surge of panic. Time was slipping away faster than he could catch it. His hands trembled as he set the phone down, eyes wide and unblinking in the dim light. They're moving, Ethan, he said quietly, voice breaking with a mixture of fear and determination. Marcus, sitting beside him, narrowed his eyes and leaned closer. Where? Thomas pulled out the hastily scrawled notes from his jacket pocket. An old mine, east of town, deep in the forest. The word mine felt like a ghost, dark, cold, and dangerous. That place is abandoned. No one goes near it. Marcus's jaw clenched. Then that's where we're going. They packed their gear quickly, flashlights, a small first aid kit, a few water bottles, and stepped out into the tempest. The rain lashed against their faces, blurring the world into streaks of gray and shadow. The forest ahead loomed like a wall, its gnarled branches creaking under the weight of the storm. The path was slick with mud, and every step threatened to send them tumbling into the wet underbrush. Yet neither man hesitated. Inside the mine's mouth, darkness swallowed them whole. The beam from Thomas's flashlight cut through the blackness like a knife, revealing jagged rocks and rusted rails that vanished into the depths. The air was thick with dampness and the faint metallic scent of decay. Every drip of water echoed in the stillness, each step sounding louder than the last. Stay close, Marcus whispered, his voice steady but low. Deeper and deeper they went, the walls closing in, the world outside reduced to nothing but a memory of rain and cold. Their eyes adjusted slowly, and soon signs of recent life emerged. Fresh footprints pressed into the mud near a collapsed wooden beam. Crumpled wrappers, torn and sodden, lay scattered like forgotten ghosts. Then, just beyond a bend in the tunnel, faint flickering light, weak but alive. Thomas's heart hammered painfully in his chest as they crept forward. Voices carried faintly on the stale air. A small makeshift shelter came into view, constructed from old planks and tattered cloth. And there, curled beneath a threadbare blanket, was Ethan. He looked up at the intruders with wide, wary eyes that held the weight of years no boy should bear. His thin frame trembled, teeth chattering from cold and exhaustion. But beneath it all was a spark of recognition that shattered Thomas's soul. "Dad!" Ethan's voice was barely audible, a fragile thread of hope. Thomas dropped to his knees, arms trembling as he pulled his son close. "Ethan, I found you. I'm here now." Tears spilled down his weathered face, mixing with the rain that clung to his clothes. Ethan's own tears streaked the dirt on his cheeks. I thought you'd never come."
No, Thomas whispered fiercely.
I never stopped looking." They held each other in the dim glow, the storm outside fading into a distant roar. Ethan told them in hushed tones how he had been hidden away to protect him from the Guardians, a shadowy group intent on erasing any witnesses to the terrible secrets of that night. He spoke of loneliness, fear, and an unyielding hope that his father would never give up. Suddenly, the sharp scrape of footsteps echoed down the tunnel. Thomas stiffened, eyes darting toward the dark corridor. Voices followed, low, urgent, and closing fast. "We have to move fast. They're coming." The rain had finally ceased, leaving the world drenched in a cold, biting dawn. Thomas's boots sank slightly into the muddy path as he, Ethan, and Marcus stumbled out of the mine's shadow, gasping for fresh air. The heavy cloak of darkness lifted slowly with the sky, revealing a landscape bruised by the storm, twisted branches, puddles reflecting the pale light, and the distant outline of Maplewood's spires and rooftops. Thomas tightened his grip on Ethan's shoulder, feeling the boy's trembling beneath his palm, a mix of exhaustion and relief in his eyes. "Stay close," Thomas whispered, his voice rough but steady, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. "We're almost safe." Ethan nodded silently, the weight of years lost etched deep in his face. Marcus, ever vigilant, scanned their surroundings as they quickened their pace, ears straining for any sign of pursuit. The forest around them was eerily quiet except for the distant drip of rainwater from leaves, nature's whispering reminder that they had just escaped a nightmare few could imagine. By the time they reached the worn steps of Father Samuel's church, the first weak rays of sunlight began to color the horizon. Thomas's heart pounded not only with hope but with a guarded fear. What awaited them in Maplewood after all this time? The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and Father Samuel stood waiting, his eyes a mix of disbelief and profound compassion. His hands reached out immediately, steadying Ethan as if anchoring him back to the world. "Thank God," the priest murmured, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "Welcome home, Ethan." Inside the church's cool, shadowed sanctuary, the three men sat, drenched but safe. Thomas watched his son carefully. Ethan's eyes darted nervously toward every stained glass window, every flickering candle flame. Years of isolation had carved walls around him, walls Thomas was desperate to dismantle. Yet, in this quiet sanctuary, a fragile thread of connection began to reweave itself between father and son. News of Ethan's return spread like wildfire through the town. At first, disbelief hung thick in the air. Had the boy truly survived, hidden away all these years? But as Thomas and Marcus shared their evidence, and Ethan's presence became undeniable, shock turned to outrage. The once unshakable pillars of power, Gregory Shaw, Sheriff Lane, and their hidden allies, found themselves cornered. Public protests swelled outside the town hall. Voices once silenced by fear now demanded truth and justice. In the Reynolds home, scars of the past lay heavy, but healing had begun. Thomas spent hours sitting with Ethan, listening more than speaking, letting the boy's stories surface in fits and starts. Each revelation was painful but necessary, a wound cleaned to begin mending. Thomas's own guilt remained a quiet shadow, but now it shared space with fierce determination. "We'll fix this," Thomas promised one evening, his voice thick with emotion as he clasped Ethan's hands. Together, Ethan looked up, a faint spark igniting behind his guarded gaze. "I never stopped hoping, Dad. I never stopped waiting." Outside, Maplewood began to change. Investigations uprooted decades of corruption, arrests followed, and the invisible chains binding the town's elite slowly unraveled. Thomas and Ethan worked side by side, confronting whispers, facing threats, and rallying the community. They stood as living proof that even the darkest secrets could be brought into the light. Months later, on a bright morning in the town square, a crowd gathered, anticipation buzzing like electricity. Thomas stepped forward, his figure solid, voice steady but alive with emotion that ran deeper than words could hold. His eyes scanned the faces before him, neighbors, friends, even skeptics, each carrying their own burdens of doubt and hope. "We cannot forget the past, but we can choose how it shapes our future. The past can't stay hidden forever. If you stand for truth and justice, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together, we rise." Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to highlight the unexpected twists of fate and the power of uncovering hidden truths. Its purpose is to inspire conversations about family, justice, and the impact of long-lost memories.